Today, I bring you a charming new mystery featuring none other than the brilliant Hercule Poirot, the world's most famous Belgian detective, created by Agatha Christie. This case is filled with twists, clever clues, and Poirot's signature little grey cells at work. Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel this elegant puzzle together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Now let's get started. It was on a mild spring morning that Hercule Poirot and I found ourselves enjoying breakfast in the sunlit dining room of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. The atmosphere was refined, the table linen starched to perfection, and the silver gleaming as though polished by angels. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, was spreading marmalade on my toast while keeping one eye on the shapely young waitress who had just refilled our tea. Poirot, naturally, was oblivious to such distractions. He was engaged in a rather passionate debate with himself about the virtues of symmetry in interior design. "Regard Hastings," he said, gesturing with a butter knife toward the arrangement of fruit on the sideboard. "The bananas, they lean too far to the left. It is a small thing, yes, but such disorder disturbs the harmony of the room. One feels, how do you say, off balance in the soul." I chuckled. Only you, old man, would be thrown by a rogue banana. He gave me a look of mock offence. "Mon ami, it is not only a banana, it is a symptom of a greater malaise, the decay of precision." I shook my head and returned to my tea. It had been a quiet few days. No suspicious deaths, no mysterious letters, no peculiar behaviour among the hotel guests. Poirot seemed almost restless, as though the order he so prized lacked the contrast of chaos to make it truly satisfying. "If you ask me," I remarked, "a little disorder might do you good. You're far too comfortable." Poirot raised one eyebrow, then smiled cryptically. "Ah, but comfort, Hastings, is the calm before the storm, and storms, they often begin with the most polite of knocks." Little did I know how literal those words would soon prove to be. It was just after 7 the following morning when a sharp, hurried knock rapped at our suite door. I had been tying my cravat in front of the mirror when Poirot, already fully dressed of course, stepped forward to answer. The man who stood in the corridor was pale, sweating slightly beneath his collar and clutching a bowler hat in trembling hands. I recognized him as Mr. Willoughby, the assistant hotel manager, known for his impeccable posture and an ever-composed demeanour. "Messieurs," he stammered, "my apologies for disturbing you so early, but there is a matter which requires your immediate discretion." Poirot bowed slightly. "But of course, Monsieur Willoughby, do come in. You are most agitated, I see. Something has happened, yes?" The manager entered, perched himself on the edge of the settee, and wiped his brow with a white linen handkerchief. "There's been an incident in room 406. Poirot's eyes narrowed with interest. "Ah?" Willoughby leaned forward. "The maid, Mary Coddle, discovered it at 6:30 when she went in for the morning tidy-up. The room was booked under the name Mr. James Ferrars. However," he paused, "there is no guest. The bed hasn't been slept in." But, prompted Poirot, steepling his fingers. "But the carpet and curtains are stained with blood, quite a bit of it." I straightened. Blood? Good heavens, was there a struggle? No sign of one, and no body either. The room is locked from the inside. No one saw anyone leave. It's most disturbing." Poirot stood abruptly. "Most curious indeed. Come, Hastings, we must see this room 406 for ourselves." "There is something," he said, adjusting his cuffs, "that offends the little grey cells." Room 406 was on the 4th floor, tucked at the far end of a long carpeted corridor adorned with heavy velvet drapes and discreet wall sconces. The maid, Mary Coddle, a timid girl of perhaps 20, stood outside the door, wringing her hands and glancing nervously at the others. "Nobody's touched a thing," Mr. Willoughby assured us, as he unlocked the door with a passkey. As soon as Mary saw the blood, she came straight to me. The door swung open slowly, revealing a room that was, at first glance, rather ordinary. A writing desk near the window, a velvet armchair, a small bed neatly made. And then we saw it. A great dark smear, deep red and dried, stretched across the pale cream carpet, leading toward the heavy brocade curtains, which themselves bore streaks of the same ominous stain. The smell of iron hung faintly in the air. Poirot did not step into the room. Instead, he paused at the threshold, surveying the scene with his head tilted slightly to one side. He murmured. "Interesting. No signs of violence, no overturned furniture, and yet, blood." He moved closer, carefully avoiding the stained portion of the floor. His eyes fell upon a corner of fabric protruding from behind the wardrobe. "Ah, et voilà," he whispered. He bent down and delicately retrieved what appeared to be a lady's scarf, silk, ivory, with fine embroidery. The initials, M.R., were stitched near the corner. He brought it to his nose. Faint, but distinctive. Roses. A perfume, delicate and expensive. Hastings frowned. Could it have belonged to this Mr. Ferrars? Poirot smiled. "I think not, unless he is most unorthodox in his tastes." A young porter approached nervously. "Sir, I didn't want to speak out of turn, but I saw a veiled lady leave this room late last night, just before midnight." Poirot's eyes sparkled. "Ah, mon ami Hastings," he said, holding up the scarf. "The room, it speaks, if one knows how to listen. We must inquire further, n'est-ce pas?" "Certainly. Below is the continuation and completion of Act 1, The Hook of Hercule Poirot and the Blood, in room 406, written in the classic Agatha Christie tone and structure, fulfilling all style, tone, and word count requirements." Poirot held the delicate scarf between his fingers with exaggerated delicacy, turning it this way and that, as though he were examining a priceless relic. The silk shimmered faintly in the morning light, its pale ivory surface marred only by the neatly stitched initials in the corner. "M.R. Regard Hastings," he said, inhaling once more. "This is no ordinary item of feminine attire. It is expensive, bespoke and scented, faintly, yes, but distinctly, with roses de maille from Grasse. A woman of style, with taste refined and unmistakable. Do you think it belonged to this veiled woman the porter mentioned?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, you have remembered the veiled woman. Very good, mon ami. It is not the scarf alone, but its context, its concealment behind the wardrobe, that tells us more. Someone did not wish it to be found. And the initials. M.R., that shall be our first thread." We were just turning to speak to the porter again when the young man appeared in the hallway once more, tugging nervously at his collar. "I didn't mean to interfere, sir," he mumbled, addressing Poirot, "but I thought it might be important." "You saw her?" Poirot prompted gently. "Yes, sir, just before midnight. A tall lady, wearing a veil, left in a hurry, looking pale, but not bloodied or injured, if you understand me." Poirot nodded slowly. "And you are certain she came from this room?" "I saw her come out of the door, sir." "Room 406. Poirot turned to me with a faint smile. "Already, the plot begins to unravel. A woman in distress, a silk scarf left behind, and blood without a body. Ah, Hastings, do you not feel it? The dance has begun." Poirot moved through room 406 with the quiet reverence of a man navigating a chapel. He did not touch much, he rarely did, but allowed his eyes to linger thoughtfully on each object, his head tilting one way, then the other. He paused before the writing desk, where a pen lay neatly on a blotter, undisturbed. Then to the small bedside table, upon which rested a crystal glass filled halfway with water. "The water has not yet gathered dust," Poirot murmured. "It was poured last night." He crouched near the blood-stained section of carpet and studied the way it had pooled. More of a long smear than a splatter. "You see, Hastings," he said softly, "this is not the violence of rage. No, it is the desperate aftermath. Someone bled, yes, but moved carefully. The trail leads to the curtains, suggesting an attempt to hide or flee." He stood, brushing imaginary dust from his lapels. "There is psychology here, mon ami. The behavior speaks louder than blood. Consider. No overturned chair, no broken glass, no scream heard. And yet, so much blood." I frowned. "But if someone was injured that badly, surely the hotel staff would have seen them being carried out, or staggering something." "Precisely," Poirot said. "But they saw no such thing, which means either the wound was not as grave as it seems, or it was never inflicted." He looked once more at the scarf in his hand, then toward the curtains. "I suspect," he continued, "that the truth in this room is layered. As with any good illusion, what is not shown is as telling as what is. We are not dealing with the result of violence, but the performance of one." He turned, eyes glinting. "Come, Hastings, it is time to begin the inquiry in earnest." It never ceased to amaze me how quickly Hercule Poirot could shift from the comforts of civility to the sharp precision of investigation. By the time we had returned to the lobby, he had transformed entirely. Gone was the indulgent connoisseur of symmetry, replaced by the relentless seeker of truth. We began with the chambermaid, Mary Coddle, who appeared no less pale than when we first saw her outside room 406. She stood with her hands clenched before her apron, eyes wide as saucers. "I just opened the door as usual, sir," she said, clutching her feather duster like a weapon. And there it was, the blood, all over the carpet and curtains. "I didn't touch anything. I swear it on my mother." Poirot nodded encouragingly. "You did well, mademoiselle. Tell me, had you noticed anything unusual about the guest in room 406 before this morning?" Mary hesitated. "I never saw him, not once. I left clean towels in the bathroom yesterday afternoon, but the door was ajar and I didn't go in. He'd left the Do Not Disturb card on the knob." "Très intéressant," murmured Poirot. "And what of noises? Did you hear anything in the night?" "No, sir. Not a thing." Next came the night porter, a wiry fellow named Clarence Meeks, who seemed more inclined to speak, though it was clear he relished a bit of drama. "A quiet night, mostly," he said, "until around midnight, when I saw a lady in a veil exit the lift and walk straight out the front doors. She was in a hurry, that one. Didn't speak a word." "Did you see her arrive earlier in the evening?" "No, sir. If I had, I'd have remembered. She had a sort of presence, elegant but troubled." Poirot exchanged a glance with me before turning back. "And room 406, was there any call for assistance? Any visitors, deliveries, disturbances?" "None reported. Everything was still." "Merci, Monsieur Meeks." Finally, we questioned Mr. Willoughby again in his office, a cramped but meticulously organized space filled with ledgers, reservation slips, and keys arranged like military medals behind his desk. "Tell me," said Poirot, leaning forward, "what can you tell us about the man who booked room 406? Willoughby adjusted his glasses with a sigh. "The name given was Mr. James Ferrars. He made the reservation 3 days ago for a 2-night stay. Paid in full upon check-in yesterday morning." "And did he provide identification?" Willoughby hesitated. "Well, no, not precisely. He said he had just returned from abroad and didn't have his passport to hand, but he spoke with great confidence. Older gentleman, silver hair, neatly dressed, nothing to suggest he wasn't genuine. Poirot's eyebrows lifted. Ah, the confidence of a liar, Hastings. It is always delivered with the utmost politeness. We stepped out into the corridor once more. Poirot said nothing for a while. Then, with quiet certainty, "The man who checked into room 406 is a ghost, Hastings. And ghosts do not bleed, which means someone else was there." Despite the opulence of the Grand Metropolitan, there was always a certain coldness beneath its polished charm. Poirot, ever the observer of subtleties, seemed to feel it more than most. "I do not like it, Hastings," he muttered, as we ascended once again in the brass-lined lift. "There is something too tidy, too smooth about this affair. The details do not align." As we returned to room 406, Willoughby followed close behind, carrying a thick file of reservation documents and key logs. Poirot asked to see the full record for the room over the last 2 weeks. Willoughby opened the file on a side table. "All in order," he said, handing over a sheet. "Room 406 has been booked intermittently over the past fortnight, always by individual guests, businessmen mostly." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he studied the sheet. "And this, what is this notation here? A cancelled check-in 2 nights ago." "Yes," Willoughby confirmed. "A Mr. Felix Dawson. He never arrived." Poirot tapped the page thoughtfully. Curious. A convenient vacancy, n'est-ce pas? But it was the next revelation that truly piqued his interest. "Tell me," he asked, "how many keys are there for this room?" "2," Willoughby replied. "As with every room, one kept at the front desk in case of misplacement, the other given to the guest." "And you have the hotel's copy now?" Willoughby shifted uncomfortably. Well, no, it appears to be missing." Even I could not help but react. "Missing? But how could that be?" Willoughby stammered. "It must have been misfiled, perhaps. I'll have staff check again." Poirot's voice was like silk drawn across steel. "Monsieur, keys do not misfile themselves. One is in the possession of our ghostly Mr. Ferrars, or the one posing as him. The second has vanished. That is most irregular, indeed." "And what of the surveillance?" Poirot continued. "Ah," Willoughby said, clearing his throat. "Unfortunately, the hallway camera outside room 406 malfunctioned last night. We've already called the technician. A most regrettable coincidence." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "A coincidence? Perhaps, but to my ears it sounds more like orchestration." We stepped once more into the room. Poirot walked slowly to the window, pulled back the heavy curtain, and looked out toward the street below. "Observe, Hastings. No fire escape, no balcony, a 4th-floor room with no visible means of descent." "Which means," I said, thinking aloud, "if someone left that room, it had to be through the hallway, or not at all." Poirot gave a soft chuckle. "Or else they never left it at all, because they were never meant to be found." He turned suddenly to Willoughby. "I would like to see the kitchen, immediately." Willoughby blinked. "The kitchen, Monsieur Poirot?" "Yes, the kitchen. And then the service corridors. I suspect there is more to this hotel than meets the eye." As we followed the flustered manager through the polished halls, I glanced at Poirot. "What exactly are we looking for?" He smiled faintly. "A path, mon ami. An invisible one. One that allows a lady to disappear and a crime to remain uncommitted. At least for now." As we returned from the kitchen, Poirot was quiet, a sure sign, I had learned, that his little grey cells were in furious motion. We had barely settled into the lounge when he requested a list of the guests staying on the 4th floor, specifically those occupying rooms adjacent to 406. Mr. Willoughby obliged with the briskness of a man eager to appear helpful, though his forehead glistened with fresh perspiration. On either side of 406, we have Mr. Reginald Castor in 404 and Mrs. Isabel Lytton in 408. Across the hall, Miss Margaret Renly in 411 and Mr. Oliver Drake in 412. Poirot's moustache twitched with interest. Bon, let us pay each of them a little visit, n'est-ce pas? First on our list was Mr. Reginald Castor, a tall, broad-shouldered gentleman in his late 50s with a bristling moustache and a voice like a foghorn. A successful industrialist, Willoughby had whispered, with fingers in many pies. He greeted us stiffly. I've already been told there was some sort of incident. Frankly, I find it very disruptive. I come here for peace. Poirot, unperturbed, settled into an armchair. Monsieur, you are on the same floor as a room 406. Did you hear or observe anything unusual last night? Castor frowned. Only the usual comings and goings, though. He hesitated. There was a woman's voice around midnight. Faint. I assumed it was some tiff between lovers. Not my concern. And you were in your room all night? Indeed I was, working on some confidential paperwork. His tone hardened. Poirot nodded, eyes unreadable. Merci, monsieur. Next, we visited Miss Margaret Renly, a striking young woman with auburn hair and guarded eyes. Her suite bore the scent of perfume, roses, unmistakably. She greeted us politely but with cool reserve. Yes, I am staying here alone, she said. I've just returned from France. I've no idea what happened in 406, I assure you. Poirot produced the scarf from his coat pocket. Does this look familiar, mademoiselle? A flicker crossed her face, too quick for most, but not for Poirot. No, she said quietly. It doesn't belong to me. And yet, said Poirot gently, your initials are M.R. I imagine I'm not the only woman in the world with those initials. True, Poirot murmured, but not many wear Rose de May. She hesitated, then added stiffly, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Our third visit was to Mr. Oliver Drake, a man of nervous temperament. Slender, fidgety, and with the air of someone forever waiting for a disaster to befall him, Drake was a war veteran, recently discharged on medical grounds. He let us in with some reluctance. This is about the police, isn't it? Poirot blinked. Police? Well, someone said there was blood. I didn't do anything. We make no accusations, Poirot replied smoothly. Tell us, were you acquainted with the occupant of room 406? No, sir. I mind my own business. Though I did see a woman late last night. Tall, veiled. Uh-huh, said Poirot. And where did you see her? Drake's brow creased. Coming out of 406. I was heading back to my room after getting some air, couldn't sleep. And did she say anything? No, just walked quickly toward the lift. Looked pale, upset. Our final stop was Mrs. Isabel Lytton, a dignified older lady who greeted us from her armchair by the window, knitting in hand. Her eyesight, as Willoughby had noted, was fading, but her mind, evidently, was sharp. My hearing compensates, she said with a faint smile. Last night I heard someone crying, a woman, just after midnight. It didn't last long. Did you hear anything else, madame? Poirot asked. She tilted her head. A soft thump, like something dropped. Then, silence. Poirot bowed. Merci infiniment, madame. As we stepped back into the corridor, I turned to Poirot. What do you make of it all? He gave a faint smile. They all saw something, Hastings. But what they did not see, that, I think, is even more telling. It was not long after our parade of interviews that the false leads began to surface, as they so often do in Poirot's cases. One by one, each suspect revealed something curious, suspicious, or downright damning, only to have it unravel moments later. First came the bloody handkerchief. It was discovered by a bellboy clearing rubbish from the bins along the fourth-floor hallway, folded and partially hidden beneath crumpled newspaper in the refuse near room 404. Mr. Castor's room. Poirot examined it with delicacy. Blood, yes. But note the texture, the lack of clotting. It is too smooth. A sample was quickly tested in the hotel kitchen, where conveniently there had been a delivery of lamb the day before. Sheep's blood, Poirot confirmed, from a kitchen cut or spillage. Our Monsieur Castor enjoys his rare steaks. I blinked. So it was planted, or discarded with theatrical intention. In either case, it is not the blood of room 406. Next came Miss Renly's quiet confession. We encountered her again in the lounge, this time more composed. She approached Poirot hesitantly. I didn't want to say it in front of your friend, she began, casting a glance at me. But I did meet someone in room 406. Poirot inclined his head. Ah, the mystery deepens. My fiancé, she whispered. We've been keeping our engagement secret. His family wouldn't approve. We arranged to meet there, away from prying eyes. And his name, mademoiselle? She hesitated. He used an alias. He registered as Mr. Ferrars. Ah, Poirot said softly. A detail most illuminating. She blushed. But we didn't fight. We only spoke. And I left before midnight. And you left your scarf. A pause. Perhaps. I was upset. I may have dropped it. Poirot said nothing, but his eyes narrowed faintly. Then came the most dramatic turn. Mr. Drake's attempted escape. At approximately 2 o'clock that afternoon, a staff member spotted Mr. Drake slipping out through the service exit near the kitchens, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. Poirot intercepted him in the alleyway behind the hotel. Please, I wasn't running, Drake stammered. I got spooked. Everyone's looking at me like I'm guilty. Calm yourself, monsieur, Poirot said gently. You are not under arrest. But I've seen this before, Drake said bitterly. In the army, you get blamed just for looking nervous. Poirot studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Guilt is not always noisy. Sometimes it wears the face of fear, but fear alone is not proof. Drake exhaled, trembling. Back in our suite, I flopped into a chair. 3 suspects, each with something to hide. But which of them, if any, committed a crime? Poirot stood by the window, watching the rain as it began to fall. Each red herring, mon ami, serves a purpose. The trick is knowing when one is not red, but simply fish. He turned. Now, Hastings, let us look not at what they said, but what they avoided saying. It was not long after our discussion in the lounge that Poirot insisted on returning, once more, to room 406. Again? I asked, though I knew better than to question him. Mais oui, Hastings. You recall, do you not, the tale of the dog that did not bark in the night? I frowned. Of course. Sherlock Holmes. Precisely. In our case, the dog is a room that screams, but reveals no crime. Once inside, Poirot moved slowly, touching nothing, but letting his eyes scan every inch of the room with a familiar scrutiny. Then, without warning, he went to the nightstand and opened the drawer. Inside, just as one would expect, was a copy of the Gideon Bible. Poirot lifted it out delicately and began flipping through the pages, slowly, deliberately. I opened my mouth to ask why, but just as I did, his fingers paused. Between the Old and New Testaments was something folded, pale yellow paper, crisp and oddly pristine against the time-worn pages of Scripture. Poirot drew it out carefully. It is always in the quietest places, he murmured. The note was handwritten, in a hurried, shaky script. He read it aloud. She knows. I must stop her before it's too late. Tonight, it ends. We stood in silence for a moment. A confession? I said at last. Non, mon ami, Poirot replied. A performance. This is not the voice of someone burdened by guilt. It is the voice of someone trapped, cornered, and afraid of exposure. He turned the paper over. No signature, no date, but it is recent. Note the indentation. The ink is fresh, the fold tight. It was placed here last night. But who wrote it? Poirot folded the note and slipped it into his breast pocket. That, Hastings, is what we must discover. But take heart. The hand that pens such a message also betrays itself, inevitably. It was just before 7 o'clock that evening when Willoughby arrived at our suite, breathless and flustered. "She's gone," he declared, wringing his hat. "Miss Renly vanished." Poirot looked up from his tea. "Gone?" "From the hotel." Willoughby nodded. I had asked her to remain available for further questioning. We had her room under casual observation, but just now the maid reported her room is empty, bed unslept, luggage gone. I stood up in alarm. But how could she have left? We were watching the main exits. "There are staff entrances," Willoughby said miserably, "and delivery doors, if she used one of those." Poirot stood, his expression unreadable. "And no one saw her depart?" "Non, monsieur." Poirot closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. "Fetch me the key to her room, at once." Within minutes, we were standing in Miss Renly's suite, room 411. The bed was made, the wardrobe empty. Only the faint trace of her perfume lingered in the air, like the last note of a fading aria. Poirot moved like a dancer, fluid, poised, attentive. He picked up a small velvet pouch from the dresser. It was empty. "Jewellery case," he noted aloud. She did not intend to return. At the window, he paused and peered through the heavy curtains. Not the fire escape. Too exposed. She left via the service corridor. I frowned. But why flee? If she were innocent. Poirot raised a hand. People flee for many reasons, mon ami. Not always because of guilt. Sometimes because they believe the truth will not save them. I fell silent, unsure of what to make of it all. Poirot straightened and turned to Willoughby. "I will require access to all staff entrances and corridor logs. Someone helped her, or someone failed to see her. Either way, it is most revealing." As Willoughby departed, Poirot looked out the window again. "She has vanished, yes, but she will not stay hidden, not if my little grey cells are working as they should." It is often said that the truth lies in the details. With Poirot, however, I'd come to learn that the truth often resided not in what was said, but in the delicate pauses between words, the flicker of discomfort in the eyes, the tightening of a jaw, the tremor in a hand. And on that rainy afternoon, he was watching everyone with the precision of a jeweller studying a flawed diamond. Our first psychological tête-à-tête was with Mr. Reginald Castor, who had reluctantly agreed to speak with Poirot again in the private drawing-room of the hotel. "You wish to question me further?" Castor asked stiffly, settling into a leather chair with all the enthusiasm of a man about to undergo a dental procedure. "Ah, monsieur, it is not questioning," Poirot replied with a gracious wave of his hand. "It is merely conversation, the kind that uncovers truth as easily as one lifts the lid from a teapot." Castor's brow darkened. "I don't see the point, but of course not. The guilty man never does." Castor blinked. "I beg your pardon." "Forgive me," Poirot said lightly. "An old habit of mine, provoking, just a little to see what shakes loose." I saw Castor's jaw clench, then relax again. "I'm not accustomed to insinuations." Poirot nodded. "No, I imagine not. You are a man who controls outcomes. Industrialists must be decisive, yes? Efficient. But emotion, it does not obey such rules." Castor gave a thin smile. "Are you suggesting I'm emotional?" I suggest only that it is difficult for a man such as yourself to lose control. And when one is confronted with family matters, it is most testing, n'est-ce pas? There was a pause, brief but brittle. I told you, Castor said slowly. I heard voices. That is all. Indeed, said Poirot. A woman's voice. Familiar. I couldn't say. Not even if it were your sister. Silence. A long one. I'm afraid I have nothing more to add, Castor said finally, rising. Good day, gentlemen. Poirot stood as well. Of course. Bon après-midi. As Castor departed, Poirot turned to me with a satisfied expression. You see, Hastings? He does not deny she is his sister. You're certain of it? I asked. Poirot gave one of his half-smiles. It is written all over his face, mon ami. But we shall allow him to believe otherwise, for now. We continued the afternoon with similar visits, short, cordial, but laced with Poirot's quiet intensity. To Mrs. Lytton, he offered praise for her sharp memory. To Mr. Drake, he extended compassion. Each word was measured, each reaction noted, and yet no one cracked. At least, not yet. Later that afternoon, we invited Mr. Castor once more to join us in the drawing room, this time under the pretense of clarifying timelines. He arrived with visible reluctance, though his face was composed. Poirot, ever the host, offered him tea, which he declined. I could not help but note the tightness of his movements, the way he glanced at the clock as though he were timing his own patience. I appreciate your time, Monsieur Castor, Poirot began, setting a porcelain cup gently on its saucer. Just one more small detail that puzzles me. Castor sighed. What is it now? Poirot leaned forward slightly, voice lowering. The scarf. Castor stiffened, only slightly, but enough. What scarf? A lady's silk scarf, ivory, embroidered, left behind in room 406. I don't know anything about a scarf. Ah, Poirot said, raising one eyebrow. Curious, because I did not say it was ivory, nor embroidered. Castor opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. Poirot continued gently. You knew about the scarf because you have seen it before. You recognized it at once. I did nothing of the sort. But you did, and your reaction, monsieur, it is most telling. The muscles of the jaw, they do not lie. Castor stood. If you're accusing me of something, non, not yet, Poirot interrupted, rising with him. I accuse no one. I merely observe. You say you do not know the scarf, and yet you react as though you do. Is it because you've seen it around the neck of your sister? Castor froze, the colour draining slightly from his face. You presume too much. Poirot's voice softened, but carried a subtle weight. We have already learned that Miss Renly, Margaret Renly, is not merely a guest. She is your sister. Estranged, yes, but not unknown. You lured her here. Room 406 was your stage. That's nonsense. Non, Poirot said. It is tragic, because what began as a confrontation became, what? A loss of control. A moment of anger. A misunderstanding. Castor's hands were clenched now, white-knuckled at his sides. This interview is over. Poirot didn't stop him from leaving. Instead, he turned to me the moment the door closed. There, the first true tremor. I leaned forward. You think he hurt her? Poirot hesitated. I think he believes he did. And in that, Hastings, lies the greatest danger. A man who acts from fear will conceal, even from himself, the truth. He retrieved the scarf from his coat once more, laying it out across the table. This, he said quietly, was never meant to be found. And yet it was. That, too, is a message. He tapped the embroidered initials. M.R. Let us see where this thread leads. It was nearing dusk when Poirot and I returned once more to Mrs. Lytton's room. The gentle rattle of knitting needles paused as she looked up at us, her pale blue eyes unreadable behind thick spectacles. "You're back," she said. "More questions?" "Only a few, madame," Poirot replied, bowing slightly. "Your hearing is sharp, sharper perhaps than most in this hotel. You heard something the night of the, event." Mrs. Lytton nodded slowly. "A woman crying, soft at first, then louder. But only for a moment. It stopped rather suddenly." "At what time do you recall?" "Around midnight, give or take 10 minutes. Poirot exchanged a glance with me, then leaned forward. "And the scent, madame?" "You mentioned it to one of the staff, yes?" She gave a faint smile. "That I did. The perfume lingered in the hallway. Roses. Expensive. Powdery. Not the kind one buys in a shop." Poirot's eyes sparkled. "You have a fine memory, madame." "I used to work in a perfumery," she said, returning to her knitting. "You never forget the rare ones." "Would you say," Poirot asked, "that the scent came from room 406? Mrs. Lytton nodded without hesitation. "I'd wager my ears on it." Poirot stood. "Merci, madame. You have helped more than you know." She paused, glancing up again. "I know more than people think, Monsieur Poirot. I hear what others miss." Poirot smiled. "As do I." As we left the room, I whispered, "The perfume again. It's definitely Margaret's." "Oui, Hastings," Poirot murmured. "But let us not jump to conclusions. The rose, though fragrant, has thorns." We found Mr. Oliver Drake seated on a bench in the hotel's courtyard garden, nervously smoking a cigarette as though it were both comfort and curse. His eyes flicked up when we approached. "I'm not leaving," he muttered. "Non, monsieur, we do not accuse you," Poirot said gently. "Only we wish to speak of Margaret." Drake stiffened. His fingers jerked slightly, ash spilling onto his trousers. "Margaret," he repeated, voice tight. Poirot sat beside him. "Yes, Margaret Renly. You saw her that night, did you not?" I didn't know her name," Drake stammered. "I mean, I thought she looked familiar." "She is familiar," Poirot said quietly. "To you. You were in love with her once." Drake swallowed. "That was years ago, before the war, before everything." He drew a sharp breath, as though he had not taken one in days. "She never wrote back," he said bitterly. "I was stationed in Egypt. I sent 3 letters. Nothing. Did you know she was here at the hotel?" He looked down. "Number, I thought I saw her in the corridor, but I assumed it was my mind playing tricks. I've had episodes." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Did you go to room 406? Drake hesitated. "Number, I swear it. When I saw her leave the room, I froze. I didn't want to believe it was her. I couldn't move." Poirot regarded him for a long moment, then patted his arm gently. "Thank you, monsieur. You have been most brave." As we walked away, I whispered, "Do you believe him?" "I do," Poirot said simply. "Because the man who clings to the past does not run from it. And Monsieur Drake, he still waits for a letter that will never come." The next morning brought clarity, as Poirot often said, just as dawn dispels the illusions of the night. We began the day in the hotel's modest reading lounge, where Poirot asked Mr. Willoughby to bring down any documents pertaining to Miss Renly's booking. The manager, red-eyed and frazzled, complied quickly. Within moments, we were poring over signatures, timestamps, and payment records. "Look here, Hastings," Poirot said, pointing to a line in the ledger. "Miss Margaret Renly checked in under her full name. No secrecy. But the payment came from a joint account, Castor and Renly Estates." I blinked. So they weren't just estranged siblings. They were co-heirs. "Exactement," Poirot murmured. "The family fortune, it binds and divides in equal measure." He tapped the page again. "And note the room assignment. It was not chosen at random. Mr. Castor requested 404 specifically, opposite room 406, close enough to listen or intervene. The pieces began to fall into place. Now, Hastings, consider the scarf. He retrieved it once more from his coat, carefully unfolding the ivory silk. You recall I said there are likely 2 of these, made as a gift, personal, meaningful. He turned it over to reveal the embroidery. I have seen this monogram style before, he said, in a photograph, a portrait of the Renly family published years ago. Their mother was a noted seamstress. She stitched matching scarves for her children. This one belonged to Margaret. And the other? I asked, presumably with Reginald. So the scarf was not planted, I said slowly. It was left behind, in the heat of a moment. Perhaps. Poirot's voice was quiet. But more than that, it was hidden, deliberately. Someone feared it would expose too much. We sat in silence as Poirot folded the scarf again. This feud, he continued, was not born of money alone. It was pride. Reginald believed the family legacy should remain in his control. Margaret disagreed. She wanted freedom, independence, a modern woman. Their argument began long before they met in room 406. I nodded slowly, so she came to meet him, privately, to settle matters. Poirot looked out the window. Yes, but in such confrontations the past rises like a tide. Words are said, pain returns, and sometimes things spiral. Do you think he struck her? Poirot turned to me. I think he believes he did. But whether she was harmed, that is a different matter. He stood suddenly. Come, Hastings. We must return to room 406. There is something I have overlooked. And the truth, it waits for no man. The service corridor, as it turned out, was a narrow, dimly lit passage that snaked behind the 4th-floor guest rooms, invisible to the casual observer. One would never have suspected its existence, unless, of course, one was Hercule Poirot. It is here, Hastings, Poirot declared, tapping the panel discreetly hidden behind a mahogany frame near the coat closet in room 406. I stared. How on earth did you know? The draught, Poirot replied matter-of-factly. The slightest current, coming from a wall that should be still. Mon ami, the nose. It does not only sniff perfume. With a faint click, the disguised latch released. The panel swung open to reveal a narrow hallway, barely wide enough for a single person. This, Poirot said, is how she left unseen. The corridor wound behind the rooms like a secret artery of the hotel, lit only by the occasional flicker of a faulty bulb. Dust clung to the floor in most areas, except for one section near the midpoint. Note, Poirot said, gesturing to a clean patch in the dust. 2 sets of footprints, one slightly larger than the other, one light, one more deliberate. A man and a woman, I would wager. We emerged at the far end, near the staff kitchen, where deliveries were made. A short stairway led down to the service entrance, unguarded and opening directly onto a back alley. So she could have escaped this way easily, I said, perhaps with someone's help. Just so, Poirot said. And now ask yourself, why escape in this manner? Why not simply leave through the lobby? I considered. Because she didn't want to be seen. Or someone didn't want her seen. Ah, very good, Hastings, Poirot said, eyes gleaming. Now we begin to think with precision. He closed the panel behind us gently. The corridor, you see, tells us not only how, but why. There is fear in concealment, mon ami, and that fear is the thread we must follow. Back in our suite, I poured myself a stiff brandy while Poirot carefully removed his gloves and straightened his tie. He looked as immaculate as he had at breakfast, while I felt like I'd walked through the London fog itself. Poirot, I said, this is all very clever, But aren't we missing something rather important? He arched an eyebrow. Ah, the voice of reason. Speak, Hastings. There's no body, I exclaimed. We've got blood, yes, and a scarf, and a note in the Bible, and now secret corridors, but no body. How can there be a crime without one? Poirot gave a small, infuriating smile. Ah, mon ami, how like you to look for the corpse and not the conclusion. It is not the absence of a body that troubles me. It is the presence of fear. I don't follow. Poirot leaned back in his chair. Suppose, Hastings, that a man believes he has killed. He sees blood. He sees panic, and so he acts. Not out of guilt, but out of fear. He hides evidence, manipulates scenes, sends his sister away. I stared. You think Reginald Castor believes he killed Margaret? I do. But she's not dead? Poirot merely smiled and steepled his fingers. Ah, but that is the delicious part. The psychology of crime, Hastings. It matters more than any body. That evening I returned from a brief stroll around the hotel grounds to find Poirot seated at the writing desk, pen poised and brows furrowed in careful thought. What are you doing? I asked. Writing telegrams, he said without looking up. Telegrams? To whom? To two parties, he replied cryptically. One to the Bureau of Vital Records in Hampshire, the other to a florist. A florist? Poirot nodded solemnly. There is a specific variety of rose I require, one worn only by a woman of exquisite taste and sentiment. I sat down, thoroughly baffled. And what do you expect to gain from this? Poirot set his pen down delicately. Confirmation, mon ami. Not of the facts, we already have those, but of intention. You see, soon the drama will reach its final act, but every performance, even a deceitful one, leaves behind a trace of truth. And you already know who's behind all this. He gave a soft, mysterious smile. Mais oui, Hastings. I have known for some time. I blinked. Then why not act? He stood and adjusted his cuffs. Because the curtain has not yet fallen, and I, Hercule Poirot, believe in giving every player their final line before I deliver mine. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel had rarely known such stillness as it did that evening. The dining room, normally reserved for dignified meals under the watchful eyes of waiters, had been transformed into a stage. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn. Candles flickered gently in wall sconces. The long mahogany table, stripped of its usual finery, sat bare like a courtroom bench awaiting testimony. At precisely 8 o'clock, Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the table, his shoes gleaming, his moustache immaculate, and his expression unreadably calm. One by one they entered. Mr. Reginald Castor, stiff and unreadable. Mrs. Isabel Lytton, escorted by a concerned bellboy and still knitting calmly despite the tension. Mr. Oliver Drake, twitchy and pale, and the ever-nervous Mr. Willoughby, lingering near the back with the air of a man who dearly wished to be anywhere else. I stood by Poirot's side, notebook in hand, heart pounding with anticipation. I'd seen him in this mood before, cool, deliberate, theatrical. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice calm but commanding, you are most kind to accept my invitation. We are here not for supper, alas, but for a different course altogether, the truth. There was a murmur of discomfort around the table. Mr. Castor narrowed his eyes, while Drake tapped a finger nervously against the chair arm. Poirot continued. A crime, of sorts, was committed in room 406. And yet, there was no body, no weapon, and until now, no certainty. He paused. But tonight the veil shall be lifted, both literally and metaphorically. He nodded to the maître d', who opened the doors. A hush fell. Someone stepped into the room, slowly, deliberately. A figure, veiled in grey. The veiled woman stood silently in the doorway for a long moment, before gently reaching up and drawing back the sheer fabric from her face. Gasps echoed around the room. It was Miss Margaret Renly, alive, pale, but composed. Her auburn hair was swept back, her eyes hollow yet steady. Her presence brought with it a sudden charge of electricity, shock, disbelief, and an undercurrent of tension so thick it seemed to weigh the very air down. Poirot did not move. He simply inclined his head. Mademoiselle Renly, Merci Reginald Castor stood abruptly. "What is this? I thought—" "You thought she had fled," Poirot said. "Or perhaps something worse had occurred. You believed your own fear." Castor sat heavily, the blood drained from his face. Margaret spoke at last, her voice soft but clear. "I didn't intend to disappear, but after what happened, I didn't trust anyone, least of all myself." Poirot nodded solemnly. "And so you vanished through the corridor of shadows." She looked away. "I needed to think. I was afraid." Poirot stepped forward slightly. "Afraid that what? That you had provoked your brother into violence? That you might have said too much? Or that he would say something that could not be taken back?" Margaret's lips trembled. She said nothing. Poirot turned to the others. "Ladies and gentlemen, let us be clear. Mademoiselle Renly was not the victim of murder, but of family bitterness, pride, and a very grave misunderstanding." He raised a hand. "But we must clear away the fog, and to do so, we must examine the truth of those who were falsely seen as suspects. And so, we begin with Monsieur Drake." The ex-soldier looked up sharply, his eyes already moist. If there was anyone more startled by Poirot's sudden focus than I was, it was Mr. Oliver Drake himself. "Me?" he stammered. "But I told you I didn't do anything." "Indeed," said Poirot calmly. "And for once, monsieur, a man who protests his innocence does so not because he is clever, but because he is afraid." A ripple of tension passed through the room. Poirot approached him gently. "You suffer, do you not, from a certain condition, a consequence of the war?" Drake hesitated. "Post-traumatic disorder, they call it. Nerves. Sometimes I forget things. Sometimes I remember things I wish I hadn't." "You saw Mademoiselle Renly that night, yes?" Drake nodded almost reluctantly. "I did. I was walking the corridor, couldn't sleep. I saw her leave room 406. She looked broken." "And you said nothing?" Drake swallowed. "I didn't want to get involved. I wasn't sure she was real. Sometimes my mind plays tricks." Poirot nodded sympathetically. "And so when the news came of blood, of silence, of suspicion, you panicked?" Drake nodded. I thought they'd think it was me. I've seen it happen." Poirot smiled gently. "And yet, monsieur, you did not run far. You lingered. You waited. Because a part of you knew you had done nothing wrong." Drake looked up, blinking. Poirot turned to the room. "Let it be known. Mr. Oliver Drake is innocent. His only crime was to be caught in a tale that reminded him too much of one he could not forget." Drake exhaled shakily. "Thank you," he whispered. Poirot nodded once. The guilt of the innocent is often louder than the silence of the guilty. Let us now proceed. There is still a veil to lift. The silence in the dining room was as taut as violin strings when Poirot turned once more toward the gathered guests. His voice, when it came, was gentle, almost wistful. "There is a certain scent," he said, "that lingers in the memory longer than most, not just because of its chemistry, but because of its sentiment. A perfume worn not to attract, but to remember." He turned toward Mrs. Lytton. "You, madame, described such a scent, did you not? Roses, delicate and faint, at the stroke of midnight." Mrs. Lytton, who had been following the proceedings with sharp eyes from her seat, gave a small nod. "I remember it perfectly. It hung in the air like sorrow." Poirot smiled. Indeed, and I believe you are quite correct, for it was Rosé de Mai, a rare French perfume, no longer sold commercially. One must either have it specially commissioned or have inherited it. He looked toward Miss Renly. You, mademoiselle, wear it still. Margaret lowered her gaze, and for the first time, a touch of colour returned to her cheeks. It belonged to my mother. She always said it was a scent for truth, not temptation. I wear it when I need courage. Poirot nodded approvingly. A most poetic sentiment, and one that proves invaluable. Because, my friends, the scent was not simply lingering, it was leading. There were murmurs around the room. Poirot continued. The perfume was detected not in the hallways, nor the lifts, but within room 406, at the scene of supposed violence. And yet, no one saw Miss Renly enter that room, nor leave it. He raised a finger. Except one man. Mr. Castor shifted in his chair. The scent tells us what the eyes missed, that Miss Renly was in room 406, and that someone, fearing what had transpired there, chose not to reveal it. Poirot's gaze now shifted fully to Mr. Reginald Castor. You, monsieur, he said quietly, reserved room 404, directly across from room 406. A curious choice, no? Castor's jaw tightened. I travel frequently. I prefer that side of the hotel. Do you also prefer aliases? Poirot asked mildly. Because the reservation for room 406 was made not under your name, but under that of a certain Mr. Ferrars. A name which, according to hotel records, does not correspond to any known guest. A name used only once for this stay. A beat of silence. Poirot pressed on. You lured your sister here, did you not? Promised a private meeting, perhaps reconciliation. But in truth, the purpose was not peace. It was possession. I wanted to speak with her, Castor snapped. That's all. Speak, yes, but also to assert control. The Renly family estate was, until recently, shared. Margaret had inherited equal claim after your mother's passing. Yet you, used to command, to industry, to deference, could not abide the idea that she might act independently. She had no idea what she was doing, wasting it on charities, foreign travel. And what you call waste, Poirot interrupted softly. She called purpose. A clash of ideals, yes. But it was not money you feared losing. It was power. Castor's mouth opened, then closed again. You arranged the meeting. You believed you could convince her. Persuade her with logic, with sentiment, perhaps even intimidation. But the conversation turned volatile. Margaret looked down at her hands. We argued. He shouted. I shouted back. I told him I wanted to sell my share, invest it in schools abroad, that I didn't care about the name, the legacy. And then, Poirot said, stepping closer, in a moment of anger, you lashed out. There was a collective intake of breath. I didn't mean to, Castor muttered. It was just a push. She fell, hit her head. Poirot nodded. There was blood, enough to panic. But she rose, alive, hurt, but conscious. And you were overcome not with guilt, but fear. Castor's voice was hollow. I thought she might die, and I couldn't let anyone find out. So, Poirot continued, you allowed her to flee, perhaps even helped her through the service corridor, and then you returned. You cleaned what you could, but it was not enough. So you added more, sheep's blood from the kitchen, to suggest something more terrible, something irreversible. Margaret closed her eyes. He didn't try to kill me, but he made it look like he had. Poirot gave a small nod. And thus you see, mon ami Hastings, the psychology of panic. Not crime born of malice, but of fear. It paints in shadows, not deeds. He turned back to Castor. But it is not only blood that leaves a stain, monsieur. So too does pride. Poirot now turned from Mr. Castor to the rest of the room, who watched in rapt silence. the weight of truth pressing upon every chest. And now, let us examine the aftermath, he said, pacing gently, fingertips together as though balancing a thought between them. Mademoiselle Renly leaves room 406, injured but alive. She retreats not to the lobby, not through the grand staircase, but into the hidden artery of the hotel, the service corridor. He looked to Margaret. It was you, mademoiselle, who remembered the hidden passage. You used it as a child, did you not, during holidays spent here with your parents? Margaret nodded. We used to sneak down for sweets from the kitchen. I never forgot it. Voilà, Poirot said with a smile. She slipped away, undetected, into the heart of the hotel, and vanished. He now turned sharply to Castor. And you, monsieur, returned to the room. You saw the blood, the signs of struggle, the broken glass, the scarf left behind. You feared the worst, yet could not face the consequences. I didn't know if she was dead, Castor muttered, his voice hoarse. And rather than search, you chose fabrication, Poirot said sternly. You fetched blood from the kitchen, animal blood, and smeared it deliberately. A greater mess would suggest a greater tragedy, one you believed would cover the truth with horror. Castor looked down at the table. You arranged the room as a tableau, Poirot continued. Dishevelled furniture, the scarf behind the wardrobe, even the curtains stained, all to delay discovery, to confuse the scene. But in your haste, monsieur, you overlooked the simple detail. There was no body. He paused dramatically. And so, when I arrived, the scene told a tale, but one written in fear, not in fact. It was a story designed not to reveal a crime, but to hide a mistake. Poirot now reached into his pocket and retrieved a folded slip of yellowed paper. And this, he said, lifting it gently between his fingers, was the final act in your tragedy, monsieur. The note discovered in the Bible, he opened it and read aloud. She knows. I must stop her before it's too late. Tonight it ends. There was a ripple of tension in the room, followed by silence. Poirot turned to Castor. When you saw it, you reacted. Visibly. You looked as though you had been struck. But how, monsieur, could you have known what it meant, unless you believed it was written by your own hand? Castor looked up slowly. His face was grey. It wasn't mine, he said quietly. Precisely, said Poirot. It was never anyone's. I wrote it. Gasps escaped several mouths at once. I blinked in astonishment. You... what? Poirot nodded. I found the blank notepaper in the desk. I mimicked the style of handwriting from your ledger. I placed it in the Bible and waited. Why? Castor whispered. To test a theory, Poirot said. And you confirmed it the moment you saw the note. The guilty man does not ask if a message is real. He recognizes it. And in that recognition, monsieur, you revealed yourself. Poirot stood very still. You see, mes amis, he said, his voice quiet now. The crime here was never murder. It was fear. Fear of exposure. Fear of loss. Fear of weakness. He looked to Castor. You did not intend to harm your sister, but you did intend to silence her, not with violence, but with power. Then, turning to the rest of us, it is not always guilt that reveals the criminal. It is the one who acts as though guilt has already been proven. Panic, Hastings. Panic is a poor disguise. Margaret Renly stood slowly. He didn't mean to hurt me, she said, her voice shaking, but he couldn't bear to be wrong. Poirot gave a final nod. And therein lies the tragedy. As the police arrived to escort Castor away, Poirot straightened his cuffs and turned to me. Come, mon ami, our work here is done. I looked back once more at the now empty room 406. What do you think it was, Poirot? Guilt or fear? He smiled. Ah, Hastings. Sometimes they are the same thing. For a long moment after Poirot's final words, no one in the grand dining room moved. The silence was not merely still, it was brittle, stretched to its final limit, like the last note of a tense symphony. Then Mr. Reginald Castor rose to his feet, not abruptly, not with defiance, but slowly, as though the weight of his actions had finally seeped into every bone. His face, once proud and imperious, was slack with weariness. "It was never supposed to end like this," he murmured, almost to himself. Poirot watched him silently, arms folded, head tilted with the solemn grace of a man who had already read the final page. Castor let out a short, bitter laugh. The family fortune, that damned legacy, everyone thought it was a blessing. My colleagues, my father, the newspapers. But it was a curse. All it ever did was divide us. His gaze drifted to Margaret, who sat still and pale at the far end of the room. "I worked day and night to maintain what they left us. And you—" He stopped short, choking on the words. "You wanted to give it away, just scatter it to the winds like seed on a field." Margaret's voice was quiet. "Because I believed it should grow, not be guarded like treasure." Castor's shoulders sagged, and I couldn't let go. I thought if I scared you, if I showed you what would happen if you took control. Poirot stepped forward. "But you lost control yourself. In trying to prove your strength, you revealed your weakness." Castor looked at him, eyes bloodshot. "And now?" "Now," Poirot said softly, "you accept the consequences." And with that, Castor collapsed into his chair, hands trembling, the last remnants of resistance crumbling away. Moments later, the double doors opened and two uniformed officers stepped inside. Their presence brought a murmur among the guests and hotel staff who had quietly assembled along the corridor, curious but cautious. Inspector Lestrade, an old acquaintance of Poirot's, grizzled and sharp-eyed, led the way. "Evening, Monsieur Poirot," he said briskly. "Got your telegram. Bit dramatic, as always." Poirot gave a small bow. "Only as dramatic as the crime, Inspector." Lestrade surveyed the room, gaze landing on Castor, who now looked like a man a decade older than his true age. "This the gentleman?" "He is," Poirot confirmed. "Reginald Castor. He has confessed to obstruction of justice, fabrication of a crime scene, and physical assault resulting in severe distress. I believe the Crown will consider it attempted murder under duress." Lestrade approached, cuffs ready. "Mr. Castor, you'll come with us." Castor rose, quietly, almost gratefully, as though the ordeal of pretending was heavier than that of punishment. As they led him away, Poirot turned to the silent room. "You may rest now, mes amis. There will be no more veiled women in the night. Only truths laid bare." Later that evening, as the hotel settled back into its familiar rhythm of clinking silver and hushed conversation, I joined Poirot in our suite. He sat by the fire, with his hands steepled and an expression of quiet satisfaction playing at the corners of his moustache. "Well," I said, pouring 2 brandies, "I must admit, you had me thoroughly baffled." Poirot smiled without looking at me. "That, mon ami, is because you chase the clues like a hound on a scent. But I prefer to listen to the silence between them." I raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" He turned to face me. "Meaning, Hastings, that the case was never about blood, nor about a body, nor even about motive in the traditional sense. It was about fear." I sat down opposite him. "Fear?" "Yes. Reginald Castor was not a criminal in the way you imagine. He did not plot a murder, nor did he strike his sister out of malice. But fear, fear made him believe he had done something irreversible, and from that belief sprang the crime." I nodded slowly. "So the stage blood, the Bible note, the vanishing act, were all responses to a false belief." Poirot said. It is not the deed, but the reaction to the deed that reveals the truth. And the note, he chuckled. That was my little test. Psychology, mon ami. One does not always need fingerprints when one has the human conscience. I leaned back in my chair, watching him with newfound admiration. You make it sound easy. Non, Poirot said, lifting his glass. It is never easy, but it is always revealing. We drank in silence, the fire crackling between us. Another case closed, not with bloodshed, but with brilliance. And Poirot, as ever, left no shadow unexplored. It was the following morning when Miss Margaret Renly sought me out in the rose garden of the Grand Metropolitan. The air was crisp, the hedges manicured, and the hotel's usual hush seemed almost reverent, as though the building itself were still recovering from the evening before. She approached me quietly, her gloves tucked beneath one arm, and her expression unusually unreadable. Captain Hastings, she said softly, may I speak with you privately? I nodded at once, both curious and mildly flattered. We strolled a little down the gravel path, out of earshot of the breakfasting guests and the ever-dutiful staff. She paused by the stone balustrade, her eyes on the dewy lawn. I owe you, and Monsieur Poirot, the truth, she said. The whole truth. I tilted my head. We've heard your brother's confession. Surely there's little more to reveal. Her eyes flashed, not with malice, but with something closer to mischief. He believes he struck me and caused me to fall. He believes I was bleeding when I fled. But in truth, she took a slow breath. I tripped. He had raised his hand in anger, yes, but he never touched me. I stumbled on the edge of the carpet and hit the dressing table. It shocked us both, but when I saw the look in his eyes, terrified, unraveling, I let him believe. You let him think you were hurt, I said, stunned. She nodded. I saw a man brought down not by violence, but by fear of it. And as for the blood on the floor, that came later. Not from me, from the kitchen. Then the crime, I whispered, was never a crime, she said simply. Only a mistake and a test of character. I stood speechless as she turned, the scent of roses lingering behind her. And I could only think Poirot was right, as always. And so, mes amis, the mystery of room 406 came not to a violent end, but to a revealing one. It was not blood, nor a body that solved the case, but fear. Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells, proved once again that psychology is the sharpest blade of all. In the end, it was not guilt that betrayed the culprit, but the belief that guilt existed at all. As Poirot himself might say, to lie is human, to panic under the weight of a lie, that, Hastings, is divine revelation. I chuckled. Well, if tripping on a carpet is now a criminal offence, Poirot, I fear I may be your next suspect. He gave me that look, the one that says I've missed something entirely obvious, and we continued our walk through the rose garden. What do you think was the most telling clue that revealed Reginald Castor's guilt? Was it the scarf, the Bible note, or his own fear? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your theory. If you enjoyed this classic Hercule Poirot mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more brilliant cases and clever deductions to life every week. And remember, another thrilling Poirot investigation is just around the corner. Until then, observe closely, think deeply, and never underestimate a Belgian with a moustache.